Jeff Washburne, served as the administrator for the Minnesota CLT Coalition for the last 3 months. Prior to that was with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust for 20 years. And so session is seller leveraged opportunities. And I think before, just to kind of start off, a little bit over 3 years ago, Memorial Day weekend, George Floyd was killed 8 blocks from where I live. And we had civil unrest after that, and the city of Minneapolis was going through a crap ton of turmoil, and we're still kind of working through that. One of the things that happened following that is that there was a bit of a reconciliation, I think, going on by a lot of residents in the city. The city was trying to figure out how they were going to respond, and I think we still are, as a city, trying to figure a way, ideally, to be a better city. But I think a lot of individuals said, I'm not waiting around for the city. There's something I can do on my own level. And, that summer, we just started getting inquiries, emails, phone calls. And hey, I think we can do better. And I made a bunch of money. I bought my home in 2010, 2011. I made a bunch of money on my home, and I think I can sell it. And I want to sell it to the land trust. I'm even willing to take a haircut on my home. A lot of the conversations, and where I kind of tie this back directly to George Floyd, is a lot of folks would say, and I'd love it, if at all possible, if you can make sure that this gets sold to an African-American household. We maybe had 1 or 2 of these inquiry calls before then, previous 17 years of working at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, but it literally was on a weekly basis that we were getting some sort of an inquiry there for a while, and at the very least, before I left, 1 to 2 a month of these inquiries. And so it forced us, I think, at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust to say, hey, there's an opportunity here in creating more permanently affordable homes through this opportunity. And so how do we start to do that? So the basis of everything I'm going to share today is really somewhat recent in that history. From my understanding, it still is happening for the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. But as I have more conversations with other land trusts, I think it's not that uncommon of an occurrence for somebody to say, I want to sell my home to the land trust. Can it be part of the land trust when they go to sell? Within that, I think there's some opportunities to build in additional affordability or development to that conversation. And that's what I'm hoping to talk through, and kind of the methodology behind what we created. By no means is it a science. And I think it can be built on and improved, and we can take those stories and do something with it. But this is a starting point. So that's where this conversation hopefully will go, and maybe we can brainstorm even better solutions as we move forward. So we're going to talk about why the opportunities exist. I shared a little bit about the Minneapolis experience. What do we mean by seller leveraged opportunities? I got 2 bullet points there. Whoops. Different ways properties can be discounted to or donated, past experiences, how to operationalize a program like this, what are the best practices, how to market it, what are the benefits, what are the downsides, and then lessons learned that hoping to be able to share with everybody. So what do we mean by seller leveraged opportunities? Essentially just the CLT purchasing or receiving a property for a value below market value. I'll call it appraised value. And this discounted or donated value then can be counted as leverage with other funding sources and can be used to create an affordable unit through the land trust. And then that discounted or donated benefit can be realized by the beneficiary, well, not the beneficiary, but the donator or the seller of the discounted property to the land trust. So why do they exist? At least for the land trust, I think we are all in a space where we have to be scrappier in how we bring homes into our trust. The days of going out and building new construction, raising $200,000-$300,000 to create one single home is tough. And so, ACK rehab is a way to do it. Buyer-driven program is another way to do it. But I think increasingly we're going to have to be scrappy in the ways that we bring homes into our community land trust, because it's just expensive, and I'm preaching to the choir there on that front. The affordable housing system is broken, and more of the general public is recognizing that. And by that I mean, there are very few conversations that any of us can have, and we're all in the industry, but I think even on the street, people talking about how expensive housing is, the whole continuum. I first moved to Minneapolis in 1996. There might have been one or two folks living in a tent. And if you drive around Minneapolis, it's almost on a block basis now. There's more and more people who are struggling with shelter. Talk about expensive rents. There's another level there of, people not thinking anything of dropping $2,000 now for a 2 or 3 bedroom rental in Minneapolis. And then home ownership, I think. Sorry, should not have had the peanuts for a break. Home ownership, I think, is increasingly out of touch for folks. Back in 2002, we could help somebody into home ownership with a land trust for a $30,000 investment. That same program, now we're investing up to $120,000 in just 20 years difference. And so it's just getting more and more expensive to bridge the difference between households, what they make in income, what they can get in a mortgage, and what they can buy. We all know this. Some people, as I shared in the story previously, want to do their part in economic or racial equity work. Some homeowners just want to leave a legacy, right? If single person, have no kids, lived in the home, really don't have any beneficiaries, this is a great way to kind of work with a community organization to say, I want to leave something behind as a legacy to the community. It's potentially a lot quicker, as I'll talk through the work that we've done in this space. You can structure in a way that is very, very beneficial to the seller or the donator of the property. And there's the tax benefit, which we'll talk about. And then, as I shared earlier, just being responsive and trying to take advantage of scrappier opportunities. So I think I took this document several years ago. The Twin Cities Habitat affiliate has something up on their website that talks about the ways that people can donate property to Twin Cities Habitat. And is there anybody from Twin Cities Habitat here? Nope. All right, good. Well, good and bad. But they're just animals, right? Like everybody knows the Habitat name. And, they put it out there. Donate your car, donate your house, donate your third kid. Like they will take it and be able to monetize it and create affordable housing out of it. It's just an absolute affordable housing machine. But one of the things that they did have was, different ways that people can donate to Habitat. And so I think a lot of these things are good things that all of our organizations should have out there as a tool, and just letting people know that if they really like your organization, there's other ways that they can contribute to your community land trust. So clearly a direct donation of home or vacant parcel, somebody just wants to sign over the title to you, that's a great opportunity, and you can start, and you can do something with that, right? As an administrator of a land trust, yeah, I can work with that. Somebody's giving me a lot. That's a good starting place. Discounted sale, and that's what we're gonna be talking a lot about here in this session. But there's also a retained life estate. So they donate, transfer ownership to the land trust, but you have some sort of a rent back agreement where they can stay in the property as long as they want, but at the end of the day, it's gonna be part of the community land trust. A bequest, donor leaves the land trust. I left CLCLT here in the document. They leave the land trust in their will to a homeowner. I think one of the things that I would like to add to this is a lot of those conversations, people can't leave all of the proceeds of their property to you, but you can build into a will, and we'll see when this plays out, but had several conversations over the years with folks that approached the City of Lakes Community Land Trust to say, hey, I can't give you 100% of my proceeds. I want to be able to give my kid $50,000 or whatever. But I want to leave something. And so knowing what we do about appreciation, what I know a number of homeowners have done is they've left the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, has been named in their wills, and what it's done is essentially provided a purchase option. Now, I don't know what the percent is, but maybe it's 50%. So what they've put in their will is that the City of Lakes Community Land Trust will have first rights of purchase, and they're able to purchase the property at 50%, for example, of the future appraised value of the property at passing of the individual. That's still something that an organization can work with. A lot of us may not even be around, but my hope would be that future employee is going to get this call one day from some attorney that says, yeah, you've been named in the will, you don't get the property, but you have an option to purchase it within the next 45 days for 50% of the current appraised value. So creating those kinds of opportunities to capture real estate, to create affordability through a discounted purchase, I think is huge. And then option bequest, just a future option to be able to purchase the property at a future point in time, and then a life income gift. So maybe the property's transferred to a trust, and that trust is able to make payouts to the community land trust at some point in time in the future, are all different ways that you can think about real estate in that donation of property. So over the past 2 years, City Lakes Community Land Trust realized over 6 of these seller leveraged opportunities. As I shared, we're getting a lot of calls and interest in those early days, but it still is happening. We were able, as we saw this happening, we realized that there still might be gaps that need to be realized. And so we started to go out and try and raise dollars, either an additional affordability gap or development gap, and raise these funds in a way that we could create a bucket of funds that we could apply at these opportunities to make them work and transition to an ownership opportunity. All of them were acquisition rehab. Some of them required very little, if any, rehab. Some of them required quite a bit of rehab. The reasons vary, but the common theme was wanting to do better for the Minneapolis community and low-income buyers priced out of the market. 2 of them came from nonprofit partners who had rental properties, single-family rental. It just wasn't working, or they were part of a larger tax credit deal. And as that tax credit came, or they wanted to refinance a whole package, they realized that property didn't make sense, and they were willing to work with the City Lakes Community Land Trust to sell it at a discount to us, or what they had into it, or who they had financing to. Our bare bottom line, kind of as we were thinking this thing through, was that in the initial conversation, I'll go into a lot more detail about kind of the nuances of this, but was to always ask for at least a lead out conversation. We will do this, but we want you to consider at least making a 20% reduction off the current appraised value in the sale to the land trust. And I think this is a really important thing. And I don't know if 20% is the right figure. It felt like the right figure, and it felt like something that folks could digest, but that's what we put on the table. But on average, after all these things worked through, we saw actually an average of 41% reduction off the appraised value. So we started at 20. The net of that was that we had conversations where folks could give a lot more than 20%. And so, on average, we were paying $60,000 on a $100,000 home. We think your home would be great for the land trust, but we're asking you to give up at least 20% of the value. And that's going to be our starting point for conversation. And I think in most cases, folks didn't hang up on me, right? Like, they were saying, all right, tell me a little bit more. And I think there's you start by saying, look, if you're going to list this thing, you're going to probably be paying 6% in realtor fees. So really, what we're asking for is a 14% reduction. Let's have that conversation. What do you think your home's worth? You start doing the math with them. Do you think, how much do you owe on the home? Like, you start to get into the details of somebody's life. And if somebody just, they're underwater, or they owe what it's valued, then thank you. Maybe we can work with you on our buyer-driven program to align a buyer that we're working with the purchase of your home. But we can't just come out and buy it, because there's going to be better opportunities, because we have other people who are willing to sell us their homes at a discount. We're going to focus on them. And that's how we got to closer to 40% on some of those, because we said, look, I absolutely love that you're willing to discount your $300,000 or your $400,000 house by 20%, but that still only gets us to $320,000. And most of our buyers are getting mortgages for $170,000. So we still have a huge gap there. Can you go deeper? We're raising some other dollars. We can bring in another 50, but we still got another $60,000 gap. Can you go lower? Can you go lower? I mean, it turns into almost like this reverse auction thing going off to see if we can make the deal work. How much can they weather in proceeds? How much do they want this to be a permanently affordable home? How much can we bring to the table? How much can we convince funders to fill our pot so we can sweeten the deal? Because somebody, average citizen, the private market is willing to discount their home by $80,000. If we can't take advantage of this, then we're not walking the talk, state of Minnesota, city of Minneapolis, whoever. How do we help fill this bucket so we can leverage this and create an ownership opportunity in a part of town that is now cost prohibitive to us as well as thousands of buyers in the city? I mean, that's the conversation that happens. Our first session, I think I made a comment like, you can solve pretty much anything with money in this industry, right? In the work that we're doing. So if there's an $800,000 property and we can get that price down point, the land trust price point down to $150,000, and we can leverage a lot of it from the private market, I'm gonna fight like a dog to see that happen, because 20 years from now, that $800,000 home is gonna be worth $1.5 million, right? Like, let's have that conversation. Maybe there is a limit, but I've seen crazy things over the years, and it's worth a try, right? All right. So how do you operationalize one of these things? I don't know. So it's good, I think good practice, lesson number one, is have a really good one-pager on what your organization does. It talks about you, the value you bring to the community, who you're serving, whatever it is at point in time, and constantly update that booger, right? Like, things are always changing, and you need to make sure that you have a living document that you're constantly putting into PDF format, and anybody says, can you send me a little bit something about your organization? You have it at the ready, and it's not 2 or 3 years dated. So always have that in place. You need that, and then you need to be able to have a program document, which I didn't have, but I created one for this session that I think we all should be using, that gives an idea about what the process should look like to a potential donator or seller of a discount property to you. You're gonna have to order a CMA or BPO if you want to establish value to have this conversation. Written verification, verbal, that someone could hypothetically eat 20% of the value of their property in a discount sale to you. You then schedule a walk through the property, develop a pro forma, adjust, communicate requested donation figures. We're gonna go into more detail this next slide. So I'm just providing an overview of kind of the high points of what I think it's taken to do this stuff. And there's a whole bunch of nuances in the conversation. My ex-colleague, Stacy, I think in the last session today is talking about, what do we call it? Project Sustain Legacy. And that's the program where homeowners who need to either do some rehab to their home or maybe got into a debt situation, the land trust comes in, solves for the debt problem in exchange for them deeding over the land. They still stay in the home and it's part of the land trust. So she's doing a session on that. But also I think it's worth noting the Homes Within Reach folks, so the kind of the Minnetonka group, for lack of better terms. The city of Edina was giving existing homeowners, often elderly, folks who own single-family homes in this very wealthy community, I think they were providing up to $50,000 for right of first refusal to the city to sell their properties. And then the city also had some funding that they were going to work with Homes Within Reach to bring those homes into the land trust. So I think increasingly, like, cities recognize that there's folks in the community, there's these limited parcels. So how do you take advantage of helping somebody stay in their home, but if and when they want to sell, that there's a right to kind of purchase that property and bring it into the land trust. I think the things, especially here in the upper Midwest, is those are our numbers at some point in time. And so to think about what can we continue to do today? How do we sell the future of what's happening on the West Coast, on what's happening on the East Coast? We're going to lag behind, but those figures are going to be here. I never thought that we'd be selling homes in the price range that we are in Minneapolis, and that's only a 20-year horizon here. So it wouldn't surprise me to start to see digits pulling into the high sixes, into the low sevens, and us having to grapple with that and kicking ourselves that we didn't do more today. Because while $100,000 feels like a crazy amount of money that you have to raise per unit, it's just going to be a drop in the bucket of what Alex is dealing with now. Again, it's one of those situations where I think money and access to cash make a huge difference. And our ability to do this really was partly only possible because we had evolved over 20 years, and we had built up our balance sheet. We have access to cash and lines of credit and a whole bunch of things that allowed us to move quickly. And I think it's easy to say something like this and realize that if you're a young organization, you just don't have that access to capital or debt the way that you do once your balance sheet builds up. And so having those conversations with lenders, somebody here from Bremer, early on, to the credit of the Bremer Bank, we banked with them, and we had no assets. And they went on a limb, and I think they gave us initially a $100,000 line of credit. This is 20 years ago. But it was it was on nothing. It was on the filing cabinets and on the few computers. They were leveraging that line of credit to us on that, which credit to Bremer for doing that for us. But it was a slow process of then going to 200,000, and then we had a building, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna secure this loan against the building, which is fine. But it was a process to build up that access to cash that I think put us in a position where we could have these conversations and have the luxury of, I drove a finance director nuts, like, all right, Molly, we're buying this home next week. Make sure the money's there, and then she has to figure out to make sure the funds are in place. But that's a luxury I did not have for the first 15 years of working at the organization. That only happened in the last 5. We had an experience early. I mean, after the Bremer, I think the next kind of access to cash that we had is out of the blue. Some small family foundation. I remember, if you know St. Paul, there's an avenue called Summit Avenue, and there's a bunch of really nice big homes on Summit Avenue. And they said, we'd like you to come over and talk about maybe some sort of benefit to you. And so I drove down, in my junky car at Summit Avenue, get out and walk into one of these big mansions. And I remember it was just a huge table and sitting around the table with mom and dad. And then it was kind of the son, about my age, who was more the philanthropist in the family. It was clearly parents' money. But they said, we'd be willing to make I think the terms were a 3-year PRI at 2%. So I said, sure, that works. But we renewed that a couple of years in a row, and they were really that money was really critical to us to just give us that money. And yes, we paid the 2% or 1%, maybe it was 1%. It was decent money, but that really helped us from a cash perspective too, just to have table money. I mean, so often I think you're as you do a transaction, you're waiting for reimbursements, and the dollars today. I think increasingly you're needing close to $1 million to facilitate a couple transactions at any given time. And so, yeah, there are people that have money, right? And they still want to make money on that money. But if you can get the money at a low enough interest rate, or ideally no interest rate, then that's golden to help kind of the production side of the organization. It's really easy for a mature organization to get up here and be like, well, what you need to do is build your balance sheet to $30 million. And then when you do that, you take a portion of that and you leverage that further, and you got all this other money no. I remember the days where I didn't know if we'd be able to make payroll, right? Like, those are very real things as you're getting going. But know that if you keep focusing on the mission, you keep leaning into this, good things are going to pop over time. And then when they do, take them and leverage them forward. And it, time and time again, you see that playing out. It just takes time, and it takes focus and leaning into this stuff. So on to fun, Form 8283, IRS. I knew nothing about this 3 years ago, and I am no tax attorney or accountant, but it's a pretty simple form. I made a copy of this. This will be uploaded too, and I tried to populate the few lines that you need to populate as the organization. I think one of the benefits, and oftentimes these folks have either an accountant or attorney that you're working with, so I didn't share this, is that some of your interface might be in a 3-way call. It may be on a Zoom call with a number of people. And so to know enough about this, to never ever proclaim that you're the expert on it, but just to be familiar with it, I think is really, really important. Making sure that when you're communicating with the appraiser early on, share this form with them if they're not familiar with it, to make sure that they know what they're looking at as well. And because they need to do a full-blown appraisal. It can't be, at the CLCLT, we often order appraisal, and we just, what's the term for a simple? Restricted appraisal. Yeah, so there's a way that, appraisers can kind of do just a short form appraisal. They go through a limited amount of methodology. And for us, it was a much cheaper appraisal. The figure was good enough for us. Lenders require this unrestricted, full-blown appraisal. And that's the appraisal that you're going to need from a valuation perspective to satisfy the IRS. So don't take the cheap route. Order the full-blown appraisal. And increase it. And if you can find an appraiser that's willing to do it at a reasonable cost, then go that way. I mean, appraisals, as we all know, are $600-700 now. So I think we had an appraiser that was able to do the full-blown appraisal for us for maybe $300 or $400. But that's an outlay of cash that this may or may not work out, and you got to be willing to make kind of that investment on the front end if you want this to work out, or if you can convince the seller to pick up the cost of that if you're in a tough financial place. But basically it's that. And then the two things that you're going to have to figure out from the seller is when they bought that property and how much did they pay for it. Typically, you can get that information from the internet, but if you can get it from them, as well as what I made this mistake. I got the name, I pulled it off of the property tax records, but that's not the same name that they use in filing their property taxes. So if you can get that information in the conversation, just to populate as much of this as possible before you send it over to them, I think is really helpful. Ultimately, once you get that final appraisal, you'll plug in that figure, you'll figure out what the donated amount is because you'll have the purchase agreement, and you want to have all this stuff ready for closing as well, with your organizational signature on it and the appraiser's signature on it, and that's what's handed over. There have been times I messed it up, and then I have to do it again and send it over to them and get another signature. But it is, I think, something that's beneficial to the seller. They can claim the donated amount, the difference between the appraised value and what they sold it to you for over the next 5 years, however they choose to do so. So if they're a family or a household of means, they're often in conversation with their accountant on how best to structure that. But your end of the deal is just to get this form to them, and then they can do with it what they want to. Most of the time, they have a hyper inflated value in like this home is the best house in the city of Minneapolis, and it's worth lots of money. And then Washburne, are you sure this is all this is worth? Because I don't want to have this conversation. They think it's worth $500,000, and I'm now going to break the news to them that every home in their neighborhood's only selling for $300,000, right? Like that's the tougher conversation I feel like I've had with folks. And I'm like, well, maybe the appraisal will come in higher, and then of course the appraisal comes in lower, and then you're dealing with the second disappointing news to the seller, right? Like that's our lives. It's just disappointing folks at a rate that they can accept. It doesn't cost you to have this tool in your toolbox to promote it. You never know when a conversation is going to be there. I think there's some bullet points up here just to incorporate that into the culture of the conversation, especially if you're the head of the organization and you're out talking with realtors, lenders, you're talking with foundation people who maybe have donor advised funds, like talking about it all the time. Here are our different program offerings within the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, and this is one of them. You talk about it as a program, as a way to raise dollars for your organization and as a way to bring homes into your community land trust and create an opportunity for folks to buy homes. Best practices. All right, again, the one-page document, up to date. Something like this document that kind of lays out the process, I think would have been really, really helpful. You have the conversation with the potential donator, and you're like, I'm going to follow up. I'm going to send you a little bit of information on our organization. And then I have a one-page document I'm going to send to you that kind of lays out all the things that we talked about. So they have it for the records. If they need to send it to an attorney, if they need to send it to their accountant, everybody's on the same page about what the expectations are and what the process is going to look like. Got to have a real estate partner who's willing to help you out. I don't think you have to, but I think it definitely helps in the conversation if you can put that on the table as a benefit to the transaction. Ask them to refrain from enlisting a realtor on their side. Because a lot of times I had those conversations like, I'm already, I already signed a listing agreement with this agent. And you're like, ugh. Because that person's now going to want to get paid. And that cuts into your sales pitch a little bit when you have to talk about that thing. When does that listing agreement end? Like, let's maybe have this conversation. If your home doesn't sell, when's the listing agreement end? Let's have that conversation after it's end, because I think this is a viable approach that's going to also maybe potentially get you to a sale quicker, especially if it's in a tough market. And then encourage them to sell or to pay for their share of the closing costs. Some more best practices. If they have to, that TISH thing, truth and sale of housing, if you have that in your community, we paid for some of those. It's just one more step because you got to order and then you got to coordinate times and all that kind of stuff. If the seller is willing to do it, in $300, $400 in Minneapolis, it's a lot easier to just ask them to do it. If they put up a stink, pay for it and deal with it, at least in our case. Get familiar with this form. Have at least one good appraiser. I think it's always good to have a couple good appraisers in your pocket if you can get them. that you can call on them and ask them to do this side work. A lot of times they're so busy, they're so booked out, and part of the opportunity here is to be able to move quickly. And so if you can lean hard on a couple appraisers that you have a good relationship with, then it really helps the whole process if you know that you can get them out within a week or two to do an appraisal on a property. Keep a running list of these opportunities. So one of the things I did was I invested in a whiteboard and I put it up in my office. And each one of these conversations I'd put up there just so that I had a constant reminder that these things are kind of in play. And so, I don't know, if I didn't hear from somebody for 3 or 4 months and they were thinking about it, like you have this conversation, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. So just to call, just like somebody's like, I'm thinking about making a donation to your organization. Are you gonna let that go forever and ever and ever? No. So make a list, make sure that you make time some week, carve out an hour, plug it into my calendar and say, make these darn calls. Reach out to folks and say, hey, where are you at? What's going on? What are you learning? Just to, at the very least, you might win an individual donor for the organization down the road if you just keep talking about your organization and show that you're a good organization. And it may be, $100 a year, $200 a year, but that you never know where that turns into. And that, this isn't an individual fundraising session, but I think all this stuff leads to good stewardship of the organization and good stewardship of potential donors as well. But you don't want to do that every day either, like just harass somebody. So it's this balance point between, just, hey, what's going on? Just checking in on you. And a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, I sold it or I got a purchase agreement. And take them off the list. Yeah. I've never pushed on it. I sometimes lead into it and say, we did a CMA on it and it came in at this figure. And if they know about kind of this approach like ours did, I was like, hey, this is a potential, this is kind of where we landed. And my sense with appraisers, the more you push them, the more they lock themselves into their position or are tougher to move. So it's like, you do your thing. All I can do is inform you with information I have and not push too hard on kind of influencing that. I think there probably are ways to say, it'd be great if this thing came in at 400,000 or 200,000 or whatever the case may be, but they can do with that what they want. We've seen some of those conversations, or I think more important, the other approach is just bringing up maybe it wasn't in the comp range, but it was just outside of a distance that they may have looked for a comp, to point to another transaction that happened that was very similar and say, would you be willing to throw this into the mix and just see where that goes? And I think there have been adjustments over time. It's just not a strategy that I think I leaned heavily on to get my way. And then don't let perfect get in the way of the good, right? Like, these are good opportunities for the organization. And sometimes we just jumped into the water and we didn't know how deep it was. And it all worked out. Sometimes it doesn't work out as well as you want, but big picture, you gained another permanently affordable home in your community. And again, if you're doing enough of them, then you can, on average, make the whole thing work out okay from a financial perspective. Again, this comes from a position of an organization that was, seeing 30 to 40 closings a year consistently, and you win some, you lose some. Some of them you don't get to pay yourself. Other ones you do okay on. And over time, you just put the mission out there and hope that it all works out. How to market. Share examples. So they don't want to be the first ones. So say, yeah, there's this home, this person was able to discount their home by 40% and it worked out really, really well. It was a similar situation to yours. So be able to build on it and have those examples to be able to talk about in those initial conversations, I think gives the potential donor a sense of what the range is and where the opportunities might exist. Constantly talking about the program, just like in fundraising, as I was sharing, that this is a fundraising strategy. This is $100,000 less potentially that you don't have to ask the state or the city or the county for, because you're getting a private donation that's helping lead toward another unit. Make sure that all your colleagues in the office are aware that you are the point person. Any of these calls come in, let me know immediately so I can get back to them. This is really important stuff. This is another one of our tools as we talk about the different ways that we help folks in the land trust home ownership. One of the ways we're able to do that is through this program. Make space on your website for it. Put it out there. You never know when somebody's going to click on this page, or you want to refer somebody to it and just say, oh yeah, there's more information about this on our website. As we talked about before, share the program with realtors, attorneys, county property officials, and then talk about the legacy and the leverage over time. At some point, your organization may lose a home back to the market, but until then, it's pretty cool to be able to say we've never lost a home back to the market. We're keeping all these properties in the community land trust. The model's working. We've seen 120 resales or whatever the number is, and this is how this thing works. Invite them to talk to somebody who maybe has benefited from purchasing a home through your organization. Like, you're just trying to draw them in and make the case and make the case why they're willing to maybe drop another 5% on what they'd accept, or gain another 5% on that gap of between the appraisal and then the purchase price from the land trust. We stumbled into this and realized that there's something there. How do you start to incorporate into the organization? And I think some of these the next evolution is to say, how do you put this out there to the public? How do you couple the legacy aspect of the community land trust, the multiple generations of buyers, not just the one-time investment to the organization? I think there's something there. I mean, I look at it and it's like, yeah, I guarantee the City of Lakes Community Land Trust is going to benefit one way or another from the home I own when I pass, right? It's going to be some sort of benefit, and I hope to be in a place where I could say, my kids are doing fine, and they're going to get the home, and good luck doing whatever maintenance is left on the property, but it's yours to deal with and do good with it, right? Like that. I think there's a lot of people in our communities, and you don't have to be in Minneapolis. Any of our communities are thinking about what's the legacy I can leave, and can I do so in a way that can do good for my family and do good for the community. I think just look into yourself. I mean, we're all investing time in this, and if you had the ability to leave a portion of what you have to the organization that you spend a bit of time to, yeah. But I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't connected to the land trust that want to see the community be a better place for their kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids' kids, right? And the one way to get there is by not only leaving money to your kids, because they may not do as good of a job as the land trust is, and making sure that multiple generations of buyers are going to be able to get into home ownership or rental, whatever the case may be. That might be it. Oh, no. Benefits. All right. All right, so a lot of things we've kind of talked about. Benefits, even if it doesn't work out, there might be an opportunity for a donation. We've talked about that, just the relationship building there. Solve for a significant portion of the overall project. Yeah, so again, kind of from a performer perspective, if you come into the equation, let's say that it's probably worth $300,000, but the pro forma pencils out at $360,000, but you're still solved for $60,000 of it through this donation. It just lessens the amount that you need to go out and raise from other buckets of funding to make the deal work. The opportunity, existing property, in my eyes, AC rehab is cheaper than new construction. A buyer-driven program is cheaper than AC rehab or new construction. Some of these other ways are even cheaper than that. From how do you get from a starting point to a sale to a lower income household? I think often is by kind of where do you get the most bang for the buck? And it doesn't start with new construction. I think it starts with some scrappiness and opportunities like this. How do you break into a neighborhood you otherwise would never have been able to? And I think a lot of it is through an opportunity like this as well. Solves to timing. Sometimes people just want to be done with it. They don't want to deal with a realtor. They don't want to have to deal with staging their home. They don't want to have to deal with fixing the stupid leaky faucet or toilet that's been plaguing them for years. If you can just say you're going to buy it as is, that's one less thing I have to worry about. And I think this approach does create some efficiencies in the timing of that. And then the word of mouth. You talk about this enough, even if you you weren't able to make a deal work with somebody, they may be talking to somebody else who's looking at selling their home, and they're talking about it. And then those referrals do happen. And I think a number of those that came my way were because of that. So to happen quickly, it complements other programs. Again, you have a full or a growing portfolio of programs within your organization. Demonstrates a creative private sector leverage. Potentially eliminates realtor fees for the seller. And the donation over time, and it can work in any community. Like, this isn't just a Minneapolis phenomenon. I think this can work in a rural community, it can work in an urban setting, it can work in a multi-city kind of situation. It's just about making the connection, letting people know that this is an opportunity. Yeah. We had this up on our website before we did any of these. I didn't know how to respond. If somebody called me, I'd be like, well, all right, but if Habitat's doing it, we should definitely be doing it, right? Like, I'm a simpleton. Like, I don't think much beyond that, but it felt like we should at least have this up on our website. And if the opportunity presented itself, we'll figure it out, right? Again, don't let perfect get in the way of the good. And like, people aren't going to do it if they don't know that it exists and that you're willing to do it. And if it required me at some future point to get on the phone, value the property, may force some organizational decisions. We talked about that. And then, somebody calls and like, I think my home is great, and you all should want this in your land trust. You're not even appreciative of this opportunity I'm giving you, kind of conversation. And I think being okay that some folks, like, you mean you can't take 10% and being able to say, look, we've really been successful. There's a lot of people out there. We've sold this to our funders. That we're always going to get at least a 20% benefit. And it's not to say what you're doing isn't hugely generous. Maybe we can hook you up with a buyer-initiated program and you can discount your property by 10% through that program. But this program is really set up for at least our threshold, which was at 20%. And 20% was just a figure that we put out there. If you can make it work at 25 or 30%, go for it. Do it and share it with this group, because I think that's the way that we can all do better. Lessons learned. I encourage them to not enlist a realtor if this is something that they're interested in potentially pursuing. I talked about the need to raise both affordability and development gap dollars. Be prepared to spend time listening to their story, explaining the process, and engaging attorneys and accountants, and we all speak different languages than those folks. Set aside funds. We talked about that. Oh, and at least for us, we've had our asses handed to us more than a dozen times on having to repair sewer lines, right? Like, cracked an old infrastructure in Minneapolis, and that's just like writing a $10,000 check that you didn't need to do. So do the scope, build it in. If you can help negotiate down a lower price that you're going to buy it for, do that. Because if not, I don't know, 1 out of 10 times we buy a property, we're doing some significant sewer line repair, maybe more often than that. And so spend the $300, $400, $500 it takes to scope it and make sure that you're in good shape. The other thing is, if you don't do it and then it cracks the next year, that homeowner you sold it to is going to be coming after you hard, and then you're going to have to pay or do something a year from then when you definitely don't have any money. So make sure to do at least this one, especially if you have frost lines that dip below 4 foot and cracking things. Negotiate who'll be paying for the TIsh. Talked about that. Details, if any, what will remain in the home. This happened to us. Like, I have this beautiful couch and there's all this other stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, now we got to pay for a container because we don't want this and nobody else wants it. Or you snapping pictures of stuff and putting it out to people, and it just takes a lot of time and energy. So making sure what they're going to leave in the property, if it's a home that has items in it. Understand the level of recognition desired. Some folks don't want any recognition. Others are like, we really want to invite all the neighbors to an open house. Are you all willing to do that? So make sure that you know what their expectations are if you need to be putting on events and those kinds of things. Retain copies of everything. More than a number of times, folks that sold to us came back and said, oh, yeah, do you have a copy of that IRS form? And so just make sure that you keep copies of everything. And it's not closed until it's closed. Manage your expectations. Some of these things will fall through after you've put in a bunch of time and paid for appraisals and got all kinds of contractors lined up only for it to not to happen. And so to be able to manage your own expectations, but overall, as you could hopefully hear from me, I think that this is really, really an important component for land trust to have. And I think maybe the lesson I learned today is, make sure that you have cash and or access to some affordability gap or development gap funds before you jump into this water. But aside from that, kind of build this in, and if you need examples to leverage, I think reach out to the City Lakes Community Land Trust, but it also sounds like a number of other organizations here have had some successes. So to be able to point to where it has worked, I think is critical, and it's definitely, probably $500,000, if not more, worth of benefit that's gone to the City Lakes Community Land Trust over just the last 3 years in donated amounts of funding. I'm taking you right up to the end. I actually we're a minute over. So any other comments? Thank you for your time. For folks that did not get, I made copies of stuff, but I'll make sure that those will be part of the packet that will be uploaded to a Google Doc next week when we're done with this. Thanks.